Hello and welcome. Here we are, assuming we get this to work. I am your host, as always, Casimir Basilius, Imperial Lord, and, well, yes. So, let us get to world building. I mean, that is what World Building Wednesday's for, sort of. I mean, today we're going to ramble, probably, a lot about many things, while also building worlds. As it is about that time. I mean, I'll be direct. Today we might not do as much world building, because I just sort of want to, well, I mean, we're going to be working on Galactic Requiem, of course, but a little bit less world building, a little bit more Galactic Requiem work, sort of. Well, it's complex. We'll see how it goes. But I thought I'd start with that warning, because, I mean, it is, well, World Building Wednesday, and so I don't like not doing what's on the tin. I mean, it's world building-ish, you know. I mean, nation management, that kind of thing. Also just rambling about the world. Not really world building, but, you know. So, assuming I got this in order, did I even type the right thing? That's always important to check. So this is episode 29 of World Building, which is accurate. Okay, good. We didn't mess up the title. That would have been embarrassing. So, where to begin? Well, with the building of the worlds, I suppose. As you may know, our adventurer was working on convincing people of stuff at the racetrack, but that's not what we're here for. That's for Friday, which is my Sunday, but, you know, calendars. So, world building. What I kind of want to do is talk about nations, just sort of throw ideas at the wall, you know? Not really world building ideas, just nation stuff. I find talking about the systems I'm working on actually helps me solve them and fix them. I mean, we're mostly good on nation building. The rules were sorted out for the most part. But, I mean, you know, actually what we've been working on nation building is simplification, specifically so we can run AI nations. I say AI, I don't mean artificial intelligence, I just mean like NPCs. Basically, making NPC nations act without me having to GM what they do, you know? Sort of acting in tune with what they should do. Sort of like our NPCs the random NPC action thing, but for nations. But it also means they need simplified rules because it just won't do to have an entire chart for planetary management for every single planet in every single nation. You know, simplified rules, just so we can run a galaxy without spending so much time working on every single aspect of every single nation in the galaxy. You know? Basically, in short, here's an example. In on nation management rules, nations have 6 stats, just like people. Well, tangent time, other than the social stat. The social stat is a stat that is technically a stat that nations don't have. And then there's the education stat, which is another stat that nations don't have. But even then, on the character scale, they're like relatively unimportant stats. Social is status, that is really only used for, well, people like me, imperial lords, or, people with noble titles, Not not something as citizens use every day. Although you could. You could. The way the social system is set up is technically a nation, not a nation, a person. Your average citizen could have a social score more than like 10 or lower. Social score goes to like 0. But, it's not like a normal stat in which you die if it's 0. But, you could have lower than average, but the majority of societies in the galaxy will treat you as if you have social 10. Like, they're not going to. I mean, it really depends. I mean, if you're a Terran in the reptilian nation, they might, you know, treat you as not having social 10. There's lots of different rules. Galactic Requiem is a very rule-intensive system behind the scenes. As, well, my players will likely tell you, the system isn't necessarily rule-intensive on the player aspect. It's just, there's a lot of, like, little systems and hidden stats. I say hidden, they're not really hidden, they're written on the character sheet. Well, at least my version of the character sheet. But they're all just for, me to determine things. You know? And I have no problem with that. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. I have no problem having to work with all these systems. I make all these systems because I love all these systems. You know? Although, even admittedly, like the good thing about the character systems, like social status, education, they're relatively optional. Like, I can choose to not use the entire complex aspect of the debate rules or this or that. I can just be like, roll, impress. We don't need to go and crack open the whole section on debate rules, you know? But that's why I want to simplify a section of nation rules. Because the nation rules are currently very crunchy. There's not a non-crunchy version. And so I'm sort of making, I mean, it's there. The non-crunchy version's there. It just needs some refinement. Basically, so things can be easier tracked for when Nation A decides to send its fleet to Nation B, etc., etc. So we're going to be talking about stuff like this today on Worldbuilding Wednesday, mostly. A little bit of rambling, a little bit of rules talk, a little bit less world building. We'll get to more world building on other Worldbuilding Wednesdays. Don't you worry. I mean, to be fair, this is Worldbuilding Wednesday. Then there's Solo Tabletop RPG Sunday. What is on? Well, good, good, good. Galactic Requiem is in the title. We only, almost only, ever work on Galactic Requiem, tabletop-wise, just because, you know, as well, the lead designer of Galactic Requiem and somebody who, I mean, I'm an Imperial Lord from Galactic Requiem. I mean, like what? We're gonna talk about a different tabletop RPG? What? Doesn't make sense. However, you know, I am simply a tabletop RPG enthusiast. I wouldn't have made well, technically, Galactic Requiem started as a written setting before a tabletop setting, but, I wouldn't have made it an entire tabletop setting if I wasn't, you know, quite drawn into the whole Galactic Requiem thing. So, I mean, I'm literally from Galactic Requiem. So, like, however, we do have one other, technically, setting that is custom, like Galactic Requiem, but different. And that would be Sputniks and Space Marines, which is a fun little 70s tech, like sort of like starships, but aliens tech level era type thing, you know. But we do Galactic Requiem mostly. Let's see. Here we are. Nations. Sorry, my books. My books. I really need to organize. I'm not going to count right this second, just to save us all the time. But it is fair to say, in all honesty, I have over 30 files open for Galactic Requiem. They're not all rule books. Some of them are campaign files from campaigns I'm running. But mixed in there, I mean, the majority of the files open are rule books. I'm not the most organized. Hmm. Nope. Wrong. Where is it? Basic rules. Here we go. Nations and organizations. We've been over this before, but organizations and nations run on similar systems. Very similar. Nations have more to them because there's, well, it's not entirely, I mean, it's somewhat true. Explaining the psychotic rules systems we use feels like an uphill battle because I never know where to begin. I suppose, look, I'll just, I'll explain this as if you are a player who just asked me that, basically saying, I want to run a nation and or an organization. So if you want to run a nation and or organization, there are two separate yet similar rule stats. Nations and organizations both have 6 stats, similar to strength, dex, con in WizChar, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Except theirs are like, don't know. Okay, we'll read them out. Force, response, resources, information, occult, and influence. Which force is strength, response is dex, resources is constitution, information is intelligence, occult is rarely used but is sort of whiz, and influence is charisma, basically. They each do similar stuff, but different. Nations and organizations both have these stats. Nations and organizations also have skills. They are similar to the character skill set, except trimmed down a bit. For instance, nations and organizations don't have the athletics or acrobatics skill, because a nation can't do a backflip, obviously. So, like, there are some skills that are missing from nations and organizations. I say missing. They're not missing, they're just not applicable. You know, there's a few more than just acrobatics and athletics, but basically, there are a few missing skills. I'm not going to look them up, what specifically is different between them, but there are missing skills. Not missing, but, not present. Nations also, and organizations, also have health. Health of nations and organizations is based on several things, which differs ever so slightly. It's not something you gain by leveling up, or something like that. A nation's and organization's HP is based on its amount of worker units and or population, special units, and its organization's stats, and some other aspects. There are a few aspects. We're not going to get into the specifics of the aspects that affect it, but their HP is modified by various aspects of it. For instance, how many influential leaders does it have? Does it have any strongholds? What level is a nation's ministries? Stuff like that. Other differences are ministries. That's the difference between nations and organizations. Nations have ministries. The Ministry of Defense, etc., etc. The Ministry of Science, Ministry of Transport, basically organizations. Technically, a nation has, their stat blocks are so similar. The stat blocks are so similar that a nation works on the organization scale, and an organization can work on the nation scale. We've been over that before, but basically a nation's stats are times by like 10 or something like that when working on the organization scale. There's also, well, as we've been over before, the reason we made Galactic Requiem the way it is and the way it works, everything can affect everything. A character can affect nation scale. And nations and organizations, after all, the way they make skill checks is the nation itself or organization itself doesn't really, I mean, there's a rare case in which it sort of does, but nations and organizations don't grab like a dice, roll, and add their skill to it. What a nation and or organization do, the reason they act similar, what I rolled here was a 14. So you would take your 14, you would add your nation's stats, you divide by 5, basically. It's a little bit more complex. I mean, it's basically divide by 5, let's be honest. And then for every 5 points that it has in total, it adds a +1 to the character's roll. So, I mean, of course, you need worker units and or assistant units to assist you. If you want to do anything big, like you can't manage a nation alone. So, however, nations can roll skill checks flat, sort of. You need sort of a unit to do it, sort of. But you can make a money check, basically, to basically send, like, officers to suppress a riot. Stuff like that. Because there's events. Nations have events. Much like characters, there's 2 ways to run a nation. You can sort of leave it to you. If you're a player wanting to run a nation and or organization, there's 2 ways to do it. You can leave it to a person you hire, basically, and or your government. Be like, yeah, manage it for me. And then you can just take the benefits, and it'll be relatively managed for you, assuming you hire the right people. Or you can be more specific and, treat it as its own campaign, in which case, there are nation-based events. I mean, even if you put it to your allies, like you NPC run the nation for me. Events will still occur, and they might require your assistance for, or you could just like you manage that. I'm not going to manage the events, but there's like events, trade deals, character. It works just like normal tabletop RPG stuff. It's very similar to playing as a character. Very similar, except there are differences, but it's you move units around. There's actions. There's turns. You do these things, and a lot of the stuff can even be handled character scale. It's still full. That's what I love. It's modular. Like the rules are very much, can I talk to this person to solve this, instead of like there's no like, oh, you have to do this to make a deal, and there's this rule that says it's, I want to make a impress check to talk to their leader, like, you know, you can handle it very much character style, you know? And stuff like that. And that's very much character, well, nation management. I mean, it's a lot more complex. I always do this. I'll start explaining this, and then I'll be a bit vague about it, and then I'll go, it's complex. It's because it would take a while to explain, It would take a while. Because, I mean, you get your stats, I suppose. You buy stats with money. And you have to make a skill check to get your stats for nations. Well, for organizations, not for nations. Nations just spend money. Well, see, this is why I say I start and then stop, because it's complex. Because the difference is, for an organization, if you want to increase your stats, you invest money into increasing your stats. Then you make a skill check, which your organization can help you with. And if you succeed, your stats go up. If you succeed by a lot, it can cost less. Or if you fail by a little, it could cost more to increase the stats. But basically, like that. But it's not as simple as it sounds, because the checks get higher and you need more money, and then there's buildings and properties which have stat bonuses. As for nations, you can build tall or build wide, but basically you need to balance your national economy enough that you can put funding into stat upgrades, which cost certain amounts of money, and we have a chart. So basically, if you're building wide, unless you're being very specific in how you're building tall, generally, building tall works. Building tall works fine. It works absolutely fine. But it's assumed you're going to build wide. Not that you can't build tall. You can. It's just assumed, because it's easier to have a bunch of lesser worlds funneling their money into a main world, thus boosting that main world's stats. It's easier to do that than to have one main world funding itself, because the more stats you get, the more money it needs to funnel into itself, and it gets harder to make money because you're spending a lot of money on the stats. You need higher population, then you need to house them, then you need to keep them happy, and it's possible. It's not like it's a lot harder, but it's more time consuming, because you need to build up more infrastructure, which takes weeks to build. Every in-game turn is a week on the nation scale. So it's not like it takes a super lot, but if you want to get more and more population, you need more and more, then you need to keep them happy, and So you can, but it's slightly different process. So it's assumed you have lots of worlds funneling money into one world, or hubs, if you will, not just one world, but hubs. So basically, yeah. I mean, as you might, as we've sort of been over, I mean, I have 3 star systems, personally, and if I am not wrong, let me double check my numbers, because I know we edited the rules slightly since then. 1,950. Let's see. Let's say 1,950. Let's pop open our book of stats. Well, that's not ideal. So I could. Oh no. Hmm, hmm, technically. Basically, in short, I could run my capital with only 3 star systems. I could run my capital system, not just world system, at 100 in its stats, which costs 1,500 bucks. It's assumed that if you want just to have an easier time, if you want to have an easier time, it's assumed you have 30 systems, 30 whole systems dedicated to supporting one system to get its stats to 100. As an Imperial with a very built up system, basically building tall, I can get my capital system to 100 in its stats with only 3 star systems. And that's not just because I'm an Imperial and we have the best tech. Theoretically, anybody can. The tech hasn't been factored into my nation's economy. It's just we have a high population, so we can funnel a lot of spare money into that. That's that whole building tall thing. Buildings and resources and industrialization and taxes and infrastructure. If you get your infrastructure to maximum, you're going to have a lot easier time supporting a world for a lot less, you know? Because, I mean, basically, well, that's not even. Hmm. No, because the yearly budget can cover it. I'm curious, how much does that say we get a year? So it says this is a rough estimate 500,000 credit units a year. If we divide that by 12, then divide that by 4. So we're earning an additional 10,000. If I've done my math right, an additional 10,000 a week, which is more than enough. 10,000 a week, is that accurate? Hmm. 1 second. I'm confused about my math. Yeah, no, that looks accurate. So if we're getting 10,000 a week, we could actually spend just all of our yearly tax money on having our entire subsector at level 100, and or having 10 worlds. Basically, it's not 10 worlds at 100. Technically, it's 10 worlds at sorry, it's 6 worlds at 100. 6, not worlds. Sorry, terminology. 6 star systems at 100 with only 3 sectors, or 3 star systems under control. 6 star systems at 100 with only 3 star systems under control. Problem is, we then face other problems. Turns out, I know this is going to sound crazy, we've been over this before, logistics. Surprisingly, having to fund an army is expensive. We actually have a chart for that. Did you know the average army will cost you, where is it? 15 credit units a week for one planet, assuming there's 10 planets in a star system, which is the average. Like, it's technically not even the average, but it's a safe assumption. 10 times 15 times 3. So if we wanted a full army, we'd be spending 450 credit units a week. Upkeep. Of course, upkeep goes down if they're stationed, in which case a stationed assault army's upkeep is only 7 credit units a week. So, well, assault army and fleet combined is 7 credit units a week, as opposed to 15. But if you want to go on the offensive, you're going to need more than one army, probably, and you're going to want to transport them. You're going to have to keep giving them supplies. And, well, the funds go up and up. For instance, a modern space army, if you wanted to make them equivalent to your world, Elysia, right now, not just any one of your nations, your entire world, if it were to be converted into cost, using our system, your entire world's militaries, all of them combined, would run you 25 credit units a week. One credit unit being 10 billion bucks. So 25, 10 billion bucks a week. Now, if you were to mobilize a modern military at World War II scale, basically the scale of World War II, but with modern equipment, you would be looking at about 100 to 200 credit units a week. So, it gets expensive. Of course, as always, defending is a lot easier than attacking, because you can build structures for defensive armies that basically turn their upkeep to 0, basically. You still need to supply. No, they're self-supplying, technically. But they can hold a limited amount, and they take build slots. But you can theoretically have a defensive army for cheaper. They're not as good as assault armies, though. You can also use an assault army on defense, but, And that's where mass combat rules come in for, anywhere from squads to platoons to battalions to entire field armies of 500,000 soldiers to entire galactic armies of billions, for taking entire sectors in mass combat. And what I love is, once again, everything scales. So, technically, a character can participate in mass combat. You're not going to have an effect on that at the larger scale because the way the rules work is you take a large penalty for affecting combat depending on your scale. But there are ways. For instance, like you're not going to be like, I'm one person, I'm going to roll against this army of 500,000. That's, you're going to lose. What you're going to do is you can lead a force, of course, or zoom all the way in to pure character scale, go on a stealth mission, kill their general, thus lowering the amount they can roll on their things, thus making their allies have your allies have an easier time, or sabotage them, or go about it in any myriad of ways to be able to basically affect even a large scale thing. You have an entire set of rules for sabotage and assassination on the nation scale and organization scale. You know. And then there's, of course, space politics, which are, of course, their own bag of worms. A lot of debate rules. For instance, nations have loyalty groups. Loyalty groups have, well, the base loyalty groups are the different political factions. And then they, theoretically, if you're a, I don't know, democracy or something, they get to, like, vote. And if they vote, there's an entire system for, like, nation management, specifically voting on what decrees get passed, what things get implemented into a nation, different power structures, who's in charge, elections. There's entire things for all that. And if you're a democracy, one of the annoying things in game is, congratulations, once the vote comes up, you could theoretically no longer be leader of your faction. Not ideal. Not ideal. But, as an Imperial Lord, and given our little nation descriptor is indeed dictatorship, we don't really need to worry about that. We are a empire, after all, with noble titles. It's not like we need to worry about voting. Although that'd be fun. That would be fun. That would be terrible for an Imperial. Don't get me wrong, the way our government works, I can just see so many flaws. What would happen is another Imperial Lord would probably try and steal other Imperial Lords' kingdoms via diplomacy. It just wouldn't work well. Luckily, every lord is their own independent faction for the most part. Well, sort of. There's also, unluckily, Imperial politics is a lot of infighting between lords. But, what I think would be super fun is if I just show up to some non-imperial world, just some minor nation somewhere, probably in former council territories, because the Empire loves picking on the council. Show up to some minor nation, be like, hey, I want to run for government. Me, an Imperial Lord. That would be interesting. It probably wouldn't work out. They probably have laws against that or something, But it would be fun. Showing up and... it'd be a challenge, even for me. Because, well, consider. If the nation rulers let's talk statistics. If they're nation rulers, they'll probably be level, I mean, they'd be considered important individuals and or legendary. So we're looking at like probably level 16 to 20, maybe 18 to 20 level wise. I'm only level 30. So, I mean, of course, super soldier and all that, and augmented and all that. So, of course, my stats are probably higher than theirs. But the amount of penalties I'd take simply for being A, well, the Empire is viewed as hated. B, well, we're sort of a dictatorship. C, foreign. I mean, it's not like I can show up and be like, hey, I'm definitely a citizen of this nation. Of course, I'm an imperial lord. I don't have citizenship outside of the empire. So it'd be challenging. It would be, I mean, it's probably too challenging. I mean, even with the ridiculous stats I have, it's probably not something I could succeed at. But it seems like an uphill fun battle, you know? Could also, I mean, it's not like we care about like their laws and shit. We could subterfuge, assassinations. Hmm. You'd vote for me, right? To lead, to lead the galaxy, right? Um. But yeah, no, that'd be interesting. Ridiculous stats versus ridiculous debuffs. The hard part is well, just the flat debuffs. I mean, they might just say no, you know. That's always an option. I mean, you know, like, what's my stat block? Here we are. Of course, I have a stat block as an Imperial Lord and a resident of the galaxy. I am around rolling dice myself on occasion. Usually not in campaigns, but, you know, empire management and all that. Who knows? I might need to roll a dice personally sometime. What? Hmm, interesting. I mean, that makes sense. My modifiers are lower than one would think. I mean, it's accurate. They're just lower than I thought they were. I mean, I say lower. I mean, low compared to other Imperial Lords, of course. I mean, it's hard to say your stats are low when you're rolling a impress check with a plus 33, 20 from the impress skill and 13 from charisma. Which, again, once more, is why we follow other people around the galaxy, like Juliana Aldis, the adventure we follow around. Because it wouldn't be fun to follow me around. It would not be fun. Well, debatably. I mean, what? Like, roll a 2 hit. Okay. I'll make an attack roll. Let's see how this goes. A 19. I wonder if that hits. Let's look at my ranged attack bonus. Would you look at that? It is 46. For a total of 65. Meaning there's no way I don't hit whatever I'm trying to hit. And that's why we follow random people around the galaxy. I mean, unless I'm fighting an army single-handedly, or, you know, fighting an eldritch monstrosity. Although I couldn't fight an eldritch deity. No, just an eldritch monstrosity. That's simple enough. I wouldn't want to, though. I don't want to fight an eldritch monstrosity. But, still, I mean, it would be dangerous. Like, point is, that's why, despite being a character, we don't follow me around. Ah, the good old days. Back when I was, like, level 4. A level 4 conscript, unaugmented. Well, other than without a neural data pad. Running around in conscript armor. Serving the Empire. The good old days. Back before I was mind uploaded. Shocking. Crazy. Could have died. Didn't. Served the Empire well. You too can gain immortality by serving the Empire. And theoretically, a title of lordhood. I mean, that's how I got mine. Wasn't born into a noble family. Some nobles are, of course. I mean, you can always inherit title. And that's where the social score comes in. Speaking of social score, I actually need to modify it. Not the rules, but what's the word for it? My territories. Social score comes with influences. That's what they're called. They're called influences. Basically, when doing noble campaigns, be it space nobility or medieval nobility, of course we have medieval worlds and low-tech stuff and fantasy worlds and apocalyptic worlds and 1920s eldritch worlds. It's galaxy out there. But basically, there's influences, you see. Influences are basically like I have to find one. When you're a leader of something, either an organization or territory or land or a nation, you gain influences that you can basically roll your influence checks to affect things, and it's all part of the social roles. Complex stuff. We're not here for that. So, basically, in short, yeah. Sorry, I was distracted by a thing. My apologies. Um, the storing information, that's genuinely where I'm stuck in nation rule editing. Basically, I mean, it's stupid. I know how. I know how. The answer's actually simple. We just have to. I just kind of want it done visually It doesn't need to be done visually. We have an amazing coordinate system that basically means I can stat anything and know where it is due to its coordinates. The only thing that's annoying with the coordinate system, honestly, is A, it's not visual, and B, coordinates for FTL lanes gets complex. Because for a FTL lane, the coordinates is like 5 steps to get coordinates between 2 points. It's not really 5 steps, but we make it a bit overly complicated for security purposes. And by that, I mean like, so well, let's swap over to it, and I can show you. Luckily, we have a map that we can literally just explain it on. So here you see FTL lanes. If we wanted, well, here's where it gets complex and where it gets uncomplex. So if we wanted to say this system, where's my pointer? This system to this system, there's 2 ways we could give its coordinates. The FTL lane between these two can be FTL lane, list the coordinates of this and the coordinates of this. FTL lane between this coordinate and this coordinate. So that would be 3, 2 to 7, 5. FTL lane 3, 2 to 7, 5. And on this world, it would be listed as 7, 5 to 3, 2. Basically saying, this goes to there, this goes to there. I mean, all FTL lanes are pretty much both ways. It's not entirely true, not all of them, but the majority of FTL lanes are 2 ways. So, you know, like, you only need one, but if we would store it under each of the system's information files. So, easy enough. We also, however, have a little bit of extra security, and we say FTL lane goes from here. On this system, we would say South 3, East 4. So not only would we list that, we'd also list South 3, East 4, and we list that it is 5 light years long, basically ensuring that there's no way we mess up that FTL lane. Easy enough. It gets harder if we wanted to FTL lane between here and here, because these are 2 separate subsectors, meaning their list of location is different. For instance, theoretically, if this world was linked to a identical world, not identical, but basically same space, they would share the same coordinates. So we would have to say subsector, whichever subsector this is, which would be like 6, 5, subsector 6, 5, subsector location 3, 2, so subsector 6, 6 to subsector 6, 5, etc., etc. It gets more complex in that way. Just slightly annoyingly so. But storing the, basically just lots of chains of letters and numbers is basically, it works, it's just a lot of letters and numbers. You know? It's easier when it's visual, like this, where you can literally just see the numbers. Well, in this case, not the numbers, but the FTL lanes. It's easier when you can see them. And then, like, if we click this system, if you look in the bottom left, yep, you can see it. 9 objects. Each of these objects on the nation scale would technically have stats, scores and shit that are easier to just hand wave away into a system. So we'd say this system's gaining this much money, this system is this much pop, and we could say each individual world has this much money or is gaining this much, and here are its stats. But we can just simplify it to the system or the subsector, etc., etc. Basically, just fixing simplification a little bit is where we're at. because you know, that's why we have templates, honestly. We 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 have this really neat template system where we can just say this is an average system. So it has the average template. So its stats are this without having to go into a lot of details. And if we ever need to, we can add tags. Tags add modifiers. We can add we can we can add tags. We can actually specify certain facts and get as detailed as we want. Or we can just go very simple and be like, it's a standard system, so it uses standard stats. This is a hub system, so it uses hub stats, etc., etc. Basically giving each one a package based on it to make it easier to manage. Or as complex, once more we could go full on complex. But the hard part, the part that's not as simple, it could be, but it's not, is the thing I just feel like I need to simplify. It works, but I feel there needs to be a little bit of a simpler system for it, which is how much money does this system gain this week? That's a little harder to quantify. The, the, the system's there, but I don't feel like having to calculate the full value, you know? But I suppose we also have packages for that. We literally invented packages for that. Yeah, well, the packages aren't perfect. Currently, the packages don't specify tier. The packages should specify tier, but they don't specify tier. So that's one modification we need to make. But basically, we can look and see this is a standard system. As is a standard system, it is gaining 77 credit units this week. Easy as that. It's not a nice number because it's a random number. I don't feel like having to do math, like 77. Couldn't it be 100? If only it was 100, it would make life so much easier, you know? Because then we could just do it in hundreds. But that's my point. Like, everything's there. All the rules are there. I just need to make a way to make it simpler for GM mass control purposes, you know? Controlling the entire, like, this isn't even entirely mapped. But, like, say we want to control this nation, okay? This is their outermost border, technically speaking. How many of these territories do you see in that border? How many of these systems? How many subsectors? Like, it would be annoying to manage the entire thing at a high scale, as opposed to going "32 subsectors." So what are the stats? What are the generic stats for a subsector times 32 to get the total? And then we can work as if it is a nation of 32 subsectors, vague it out. We don't need to know exactly how many systems, how many things. And we'll make one of those a Dyson swarm. So we know there's one Dyson swarm with the stats. And I mean, let's be honest, if it's 32 subsectors in one Dyson swarm, we might as well just use the Dyson swarm stats because the rest of it doesn't matter. But you get my point. Like, let's say there wasn't a Dyson swarm. We can use 32 generic subsectors. As we have one special with the Dyson swarm, technically, we would just use Dyson swarm because the Dyson swarm dwarfs 32. But like if there's a special subsector, we would use 31 sectors and one special sector. 31 subsectors, one special subsector, basically to make it easier to run as the GM. Because I'll remind you, every one of these white squares is a sector, right? That's not a question. Every one of those is a sector. This is a subsector. This is a sector. Look how many objects there are. Then we go. So, every one of these is a, why is it lagging? There we go. Every one of these is a subsector. Every one of these is a system. And every one of these is a sector. And then we look at the galaxy, you know? Look how many sectors the Galactic Council is, you know? Look how many sectors the Terran nations are. Any of these nations, it gets to a lot of territory, a lot of management, which is so much easier to just say sector stat. Admittedly, your stats don't go that far. You have it simple enough in a sense that other than money making and certain things like population, money, and all that, the way nation management works is your subsector is pretty much the highest scale. So your capital subsector is the one affecting things. You only ever need basically one subsector. So you could affect over here with your capital, or use a closer subsector's capital to affect over there, and so forth, for management purposes. Distance provides penalty and all that. But it's a lot of that. Which ideally over time we'll get to. Juliana Aldous might live, might die. Who knows? We'll follow her around for a lot longer. And then maybe we'll run nations, run organizations, run a mercenary guild as either Juliana Aldous or some other character. Who knows? We'll see what happens on our solo Sundays. Where the galaxy takes us. What events occur. We're just going to live in Galactic Requiem, basically. Have fun. That kind of thing. And as I've been over a long time before, we got Crisp. Crisp is a challenge resolution. It's a challenge resolution system that is named CRISP, which is an acronym for something I'd have to look up. Basically letting us do everything. And there's debates and chases and bureaucracy, nation management, mass combat, vehicle management. I mean, like I said, we simulate a universe. Well, a galaxy. There's more than one galaxy, but you know, everything pretty much takes place in this galaxy for ease of use. One galaxy is more than enough. Don't need more than one. Well, bold of me. I know. As an Imperial in the grand dimensional empire whose entire modus operandi is to capture multiple universes and all the galaxies within them, you know, like, bold of me to say one galaxy's enough, but one galaxy's enough. So, I mean, let's do the math. Let's do the math for fun. Oh, Up here. This will make it easier. So, there are about... Wait, is it higher? Oh, yep, it is. There are about 1,500 sectors. 1,500. Or about 200 and some odd thousand light years across. But 1,500 sectors times about 100 subs, well, not about 100 subsectors in a sector times 10 systems in a subsector is about 1,500,000. That's 1,500,000 systems from the left side of the galaxy to the right side of the galaxy. We would probably, well, let's do this correctly. 1,500 times, because up and down, 1,500 times 100 times 10 is about 2 billion 250 million systems. 2 billion 250 million star systems. There's more than enough star systems for adventure here. So many nations, so many factions. There can even be systems with nothing in them. You can destroy as many systems as you want. There's more systems. And this is civilized space. This one square, basically. Sure, there's a little bit up here. There's some over here. There's a little down here. There's Imperial territory over here. But look at all this untamed land all around, ready for adventure. Like, space is big. Space is ridiculously big. So, you know, more than enough space in a galaxy. And so our adventures will continue to the end of time. Yeah. What else is there? Well, I mean, there's just a lot of things to work on. But, I mean, we're not going to swap over to world building. We talked about random stuff. Next World Building Wednesday, we'll actually world build. Next World Building Wednesday, we'll actually world build. Next stream, however, is going to be TTRPG Day, in which we play the dice. We roll the dice. The dice happen. We'll follow Yulana Aldis, our level 6 adventurer, as she goes on her adventures. We'll try and get back to our news streams. I've been busy recently. And our lore videos. I'm probably going to miss this month's lore video and news stream. Probably. But it should start back up soon. We'll have our lore and our news. Speaking of lore, I actually need to figure out what our next video is going to be about. We did FTL. What other topics are there to cover? Of the lore, big topics. Probably Galactic Standard. Maybe. Maybe a history lesson. the FTL era we could talk about. Starship engines. No, we sort of talked about that with. I don't feel talking about space travel is going to be beneficial. When I say talking about space travel, I mean like it would be a very short lore episode. I mean, what's there to say? One travels through space. We could talk about gravity, I guess. Like, not really much to talk about there. It isn't rules as opposed to law. We'll find something. So, I mean, it's going to be a bit short today, I suppose. But, I mean, I, hearing me ramble and repeat the same stuff about nations, meh. We'll actually world build next World Building Wednesday. Thank you for stopping by, I suppose. I have been your host, Casimir Basilius, as always, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for stopping by.